Yes, welcome to the Design, Research and Innovation Festival 2020. Welcome to Drive Mobility. Woo! Yes, with our live audience here and people who are watching online by Zoom. Because for the 7th year in a row, ClickNL and Design United, they bring you state-of-the-art knowledge and innovation. And this year, more than ever, we focus on social challenges. And today it's about mobility, and being able to go wherever we want to or need to is of great importance for our well-being and our personal development. Whatever we go to work, family, to the beach or shopping, in all cases we rely on a number of modalities to take us there and of course also back. We switch from bike to train to bus to walking, alone or together with others, sometimes in a hurry and sometimes less stressed, but in all cases reliability and flexibility is crucial. So how can we design this in a sustainable and in a COVID safe system? That is what we will discuss about today in Drive session on mobility. Yes, yes, Marjolein, we are talking here live with the people in the Evenaar, but also with people back home. And it's also, of course, important for us to know who is watching. So let's see, maybe also here in the Evenaar, creative professionals. Who of you is a creative professional? Maybe can you raise your hand? Okay, yes, we see 4 or 5 hands coming up, yes. And who of you is a researcher? Okay, a lot of researchers. Okay, welcome. And who works for the government? Oh. Okay, other clients, are they also? No clients. Okay, welcome. And how is that with the people who are watching online?
Well, we have a lot of creative professionals online as well, and some researchers, and we have also people who are something else, which I find quite interesting, but they haven't elaborated on it.
Okay.
So, but yes, a nice spread across.
Okay,
the
well, maybe the people can use the chat to tell us who they are then,
yes,
the other position.
Yes.
And you also chat with them before 11 o'clock, and you ask them the question, what do they think of the role of the designer, the role and the skills in creating a more sustainable mobility system?
Yes.
And what is their response on that question?
Well, it's a nice spread as well, I guess. Some say the designers are sufficiently involved, which is good, and others say they are involved, but only at the end of design, so only when it comes to making a website or to making an app instead of on the start of the process. And we also have some people say they want to be involved, but they miss the network or the knowledge.
Okay, so they miss the network, the knowledge, the skills to get involved beforehand. And
Yes.
what is the opinion of the people here in the Evenaar? What do you think, guys? Are designers, are they well enough involved? Who has an opinion? More and more. We have also a microphone, but you say more and more. And what is needed actually to get them more involved? Does somebody know? No. Yes? Okay, knowledge is important. Okay, well, maybe that's what we will discuss here today. So thank you for that. Because what is happening in the world of design, that's our first theme. Madelaine Berlis, she's a social designer at Afdeling Buitengewone Zaken, a social service design bureau. She will talk about a project that she did on mobility and on how to involve the users in order to create behavioral change. Madelaine, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone here in the room, everyone online. I'm going to tell you something today about my way of working as a designer in the field of mobility. But first I will tell you what social design means. Social design is designing for the common good, which can be seen as collective, long-term concerns of society. You can see in this graph that you have individual concerns and collective concerns, divided in short-term and long-term. Often these are not in line with each other. The individual would, for instance, often prefer the car. due to convenience and comfort. And for the collective, this would be disadvantages in the long run due to fossil fuels polluting the air, etc. This is the theory behind my work, but what does it mean in practice? Since about 2 years, I'm involved in projects around mobility, and since April, we're working for the Verkeersonderneming, a mobility and traffic company in Rotterdam. As you can see on the photos, I'm always in touch with the end users. I drive with them in their cars, I explain how an e-bike works, I call them, they call me. And the reason for this direct contact is to fully comprehend the system I'm designing for and to know the personal concerns I need to take into account. And today I will share one project with you by explaining its process and its current status. I will then finish with 2 challenges I faced while working in the field of mobility as a designer. But first, an example of bad design. The sign says, "Attention, beach full, go back." It's meant for people visiting the beach. Not only is it very annoying to spot this sign while you're already driven all the way and now you're stuck in a traffic jam, it's also very ineffective because people tend to ignore a rule when it's stuck up their noses like this. The reason that I show you this photo, though, is that mobility around visitors is still an underexposed topic. So we started something called the bezoekersaanpak to tackle mobility questions around visitors and tourism. One of the visitors' hotspots we're currently working on is Hoek van Holland, a beach close to Rotterdam. The municipality wants to spread their visitors more throughout the year, instead of having overcrowded beaches and traffic jams on the 30 sunny days we have in the Netherlands. They also aim to keep their visitors, residents, entrepreneurs and nature healthy and happy, and feel that mobility plays an important factor in this balance. However, they had no idea who the visitor of Hoek van Holland actually is, and what their needs and incentives are. In order to figure this out, we conducted 2 studies, explorative street interviews and an online survey. Through these studies, we got an image of the context of Hoek van Holland, and we developed personas. Personas can be seen as a category of a certain type of people with the aim of giving you a sense of this group while getting to know their needs and wishes. Here you see the parking lot of Hoek van Holland. It's big, free, and in walking distance from the beach. Quite difficult to get people take another form of transport with such an enormous parking lot. The car is already the most comfortable and often quickest way of transport, and in this situation it's even more convenient. But then, do we have to remove this parking space or move it? You can also see how it takes in such a big chunk of nature. And during peak time it's completely full and there are hours of traffic jams, so at these moments we'll need alternatives anyway. Also, since last year, there is a metro connection to Hoek van Holland Haven. In 2022, the metro line will have a new stop almost directly on the beach. In the future, it would be good to motivate people who live close to the metro line to go by metro, and to motivate people who come from further places, like Germany, to park their car at Hoek van Holland Haven and to take the metro for the last mile. In short, to create a mobility hub for people who depend on their car and to motivate the rest to use other types of transport. But what kind of mobility hub do we need in this context? The personas we developed, which were based on our research, can help with this question. We have the sun enjoyers, German guests, Corona holiday seekers, water and nature lovers, active seniors, and surfers. I don't have time to further explain them, but I will place them on a map, because by doing so we can learn which modes of transport we'll need for the mobility hub. On the map you see personas placed on different areas. The sun enjoyers are on the left because they already take the metro. They can motivate their peers to also go by metro and can be ambassadors of public transport. Active seniors, up on the right, they don't even take the car and do everything by e-bike. Water and nature lovers placed at the mobility hub, as you can see there, can firstly be motivated to take public transport, but if this isn't possible for them, they can park their car on the mobility hub at the haven and take the metro or bicycle for the last mile. German guests often stay for a longer amount of time. They have more luggage to carry, so for them a solution like a golf cart would be interesting to go to their hotel. Corona holiday seekers also tend to have luggage, like chairs and a table, but these can be solved by placing more benches along the coastline. Then they can also easily take the metro, or even take their own bicycles. Finally, surfers, they carry their own boards, and thus you'd think that the only logical parking spot would be very close to the beach. However, if you give them a cart big enough for their boards, it might be an option to have them park their car further away as well. So this mobility hub idea is one of the directions we'll further investigate and develop together with the municipality. The interventions we aim to place in this context will first be tested on a low scale to validate people's responses and behavior in an early phase. So this was a small peek in our way of working. I'll now finish with two challenges that I see in the field of mobility, and I'm curious to hear if you have similar opinions. For this, I'll first go back to this image, because when does mobility serve the common good? When mobility is sustainable, divided equally, and does not harm living environments or nature. In order to get there, we need a systems change, a change in the whole sector. And for this type of change, two main things are standing in the way. First of all, as I already said, we made the car too comfortable by focusing on short-term individual concerns for years now. It's hard to get people out of their cars, but it's necessary for the change we need. Not only because of pollution, but also for the space a car takes up on the road and while being parked. Tackling this issue can be achieved with a combined effort of behavior change and regulations. Secondly, most of mobility research is about big data instead of qualitative human factors. Whereas we notice in our work that these human factors are essential to innovate and make your ideas work. Also, in mobility research, the frame that is chosen is still often the highway, instead of the whole context. This is a shame, because mobility is so much more than only cars driving on our main roads. It eventually is about everyone, going from A to B. Thank you.
Well, Madelaine, thank you very much for your presentation. Come join us here on the table, because I guess there are some questions. Marjolein, are there already questions from the people back home?
Well, I heard a small question. The human factors, could you elaborate a little bit on that? What are the human factors to take into account?
The human factors.
Okay. Yes, so if you look at the personas we developed are based on real people, but they're fictive characters that really show what kind of needs and incentives people have. So if we talk about human factors, it's really about these needs and incentives, and you need them for behavior change, because otherwise you won't be able to steer people in a certain direction.
Yes, and is that also, if we talk about the contribution of designers solving societal problems and challenges, is this a perfect example of the way designers think?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. So. As I said in my presentation, the classical way of thinking is very much about big data, looking at systems from a zoomed-out perspective, whereas as designers, we are very used to placing the human, the user, in the middle of your design and as your starting point. So yeah, this is a good example, I think.
Yes, because for me it sounds very familiar, not really familiar, but you know, it's more common sense to use the design, the users of mobility. So how is your client reacting on this kind of research?
So for them, it's actually still very new, but it's this project is for the verkeersonderneming, and they are actually quite innovative in the field, I would say. They still have a very classical branch as well, but we developed this bezoekersaanpak. There is also a bewonersaanpak, so for residents, and a werkgeversaanpak. So by naming these approaches by the users that you're interested in and that you want to help, you shift the focus already, I think.
Yes. And I can also imagine that the world of designing it will become more and more a world of psychologists, sociologists, people who have really experts in human behavior. Is that true? What kind of people do work at your company?
Yes, for sure. I myself did a postmaster in behavior change because I felt that I needed to have more information and really have a backbone in this field to work with in my designs and to really have enough knowledge about this and to implement that as
Yes.
well. Yeah.
Are there any other questions from the people back home?
Well, from the people back home, there's people interested in who commissions this project. So who's your client?
Yeah, the verkeersonderneming. So that is a traffic mobility company in Rotterdam. They started this approach for visitors, but we as a Afdeling Buitengewone Zaken had a lot of freedom in helping to really develop this approach. Dus we are now working with personas. We're doing these street interviews, combining it with surveys, and that's something that we really initiated.
Yes. So now you know what those personas, what they want, what their desires or needs are. So what is the next step then now in your research?
The next step is to develop interventions on a small scale. So we still have a lot of aannames, assumptions, and we would like to test them on a bigger scale. And by placing interventions on a low scale in an area, you can validate the assumptions and go to your next step. And in the end, you want to have final intervention that you can really implement on a longer term.
Yeah, because what is the end goal of your research or of the assignment?
Yeah, to really place these interventions and validate them and to develop them until they're finished and they have the effect that we want to have.
Yeah, so for example, to get people out of the car,
Yeah,
using different kind of modalities to go to the beach.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think and I said in my presentation that it's really about behavior change and regulations at the same time. I really believe that because if you only change the behavior of consumers, but the municipality is still very classic in its way of thinking or don't want to change the size of the parking lot, for instance, then it's still very difficult to make a systems change.
Yeah, so working together with different stakeholders, different forces is very important. But what about alternatives? Because if you change behavior, but there is not a real good alternative for people, then they will still use the car probably.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So what is your influence as a designer in creating those alternatives?
My influence is that, well, of course, there are already very good innovations going on right now, the electrical sharing scooters, for instance. And so we always look at the context and see what is already there and try to really attach our interventions to the existing new innovations. And yeah, those interventions are based on insights we gain from research. So yeah, they fit into the context already.
Yeah, they fit in. Okay, so working together is very important, getting all those stakeholders online and on board. Let's see, are there any questions from our people here live in the Effenaar? Yes, Bart, and do we have a mic? It's coming.
Here comes the hengel. What do you call this?
Yes, we call it a hengel.
The hengel.
Yes, thank you. I was interested, Madeleine, did you consider to involve scientists, researchers during the process or in the next steps for instance, validation of the results?
Yes, well, the verkeersonderneming has its own data team. So they help us with more the quantitative data analysis. But actually, we haven't involved researchers from other fields yet. Would be a good idea, I think. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Well, we can make the connection for you, I
yeah.
guess.
Yeah, because what are your suggestions, Bart?
Oh well, it depends on of course the topic and what part of the development needs to be tested or needs to be validated. But I can imagine that in the field of behavioral change, well, you need to be very careful on the interventions that you are doing and what the effect of that is.
Yes.
So in that field, I could think of that you might involve some scientists.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. Marjolein,
Yes,
people back home.
We have someone from home who would like to ask the question himself.
Okay, so live.
Ooh.
So his name is Antoine Viotto. I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly, and if I'm correctly.
Well pronounced.
Ah, there you are.
There you are.
Yeah.
Welcome in the show.
Thank you. So I'm Antoine Viotto. I'm a product developer, and I work on mobility solutions. And I find your approach really interesting because you are thinking about modifying the global transportation solution to push the people to have the good behaviors. And I was wondering if in this process you have been working with urban architects and with mobility designers, because it will be really nice to bring those people together to move forwards, I think.
That's a great idea. Yeah, thanks. At the municipality, there are people who have different types of backgrounds, so they are knowledgeable in the field of mobility and also in urban architecture. But yeah, I think it's really good to, especially when we start to really develop these interventions and they become to be on a bigger scale, to involve more people that really have knowledge about these type of questions.
Yes,
Sure. Yeah.
and sorry, I forgot your name, but do you have a recommendation for Madelaine? How can you bring those different worlds together? Do you have experience with that or a recommendation?
I don't know. So I'm Antoine. Yeah, it's not a usual name, but I think organizing one or two sessions. I see, for instance, Circo, which is bringing customers and helping customers with designers to improve circular design. I think such a process may be possible to organize one or two daily sessions where you invite some participants from a design organization, from urban office, maybe from the NS, for instance, as well. Different organization and bring them together working on a workshop for 2 or 3 days.
Okay.
Maybe not in a row, but yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. So bringing people more together on a daily basis or a weekly basis. No questions in the audience here? Yes, there is one.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested. You had a black dot, common good, on the upper right. And I was wondering if that's your ideal, because if that's your ideal, I would question it. Because isn't the ideal also that it's a balance, you basically said it, between the individual and the collective? So wouldn't the common good actually be the common good? I mean, the balance between what is good for us in a systemic way and what's good for the individual. So shouldn't then the ideal not be moved a bit more to the center?
Or maybe should it not be completely filling up the whole graph?
Yeah.
Corner.
All right, thanks. I do think you have to have a balance between them, because if you don't serve the individuals, the individual concern, then you won't get people along in the collective concerns, or at least it's very, very difficult, I think. So common good, the reason that I put it there is that normally we would start thinking at individual concerns and then maybe think about the collective. And so it's mainly the idea to start at the collective concern and think about that, and then try to connect it to the individual concern.
Yeah. Because is it also what you notice, that what is good for the individual is not always good for society or for our planet?
Yeah, most of the time it's different. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So how can you make that gap less big then?
Yeah, and that often has to do with behavior change. You can, for instance, ask people to do a goede voornemens, for
Yes.
instance, but then make them very concrete and do not ask something for a very long run. But those are already ways of motivating people to think more on a long term.
To stimulate people also to make small steps.
Yeah, and to see, see it in smaller steps instead of one very big leap. So you have certain ways of doing that and to bridge that gap.
Yeah. Well, last question for you, because we started with the question for the audience as well, what they think of the role of designers and if their skills are well enough used to make that change to sustainable mobility. What do you think? Is the role of designers, are you getting used enough?
Well, so at the Verkeersonderneming, we have a very, very good role. I think it's a good example of how designers should be involved in projects.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So this is a perfect example.
I
Well,
hope
thank
so.
you very much, Madelaine, for being in Drive 2020. And let's move on to our second theme, because we heard what's happening now in the world of design, but what is actually happening in the world of research? I will talk with Katinka Bergema. She's a researcher from Delft University of Technology, and Suzanne Hiemstra from Mastrigt, also a researcher at the University of Delft. I think they're both online with...
First day, guys, first day.
Yes, there they are. Katinka and Suzanne. I think you're both online with us on Zoom. Okay, yes. There I can see you now. Welcome in Drive 2020. Katinka, you are a researcher together with Suzanne, and you both are still doing research, more inventory research on what's going on mobility. And what can you tell us about that?
Maybe I'm not a researcher at the Delft University, but did some research on what's happening in all the technical universities in the Netherlands on mobility research. So I made an analysis on that for the last weeks.
Yes, and my name is Suzanne Hiemstra from Mastrigt, and I am indeed a researcher at Delft University of Technology at our Faculty of Industrial Design Engineering, and I'm the director of the Seamless Personal Mobility Lab, where we do research in designing mobility.
Okay, so tell us more about the research from the four universities.
Yes. What we saw in the research, or what I did is I interviewed different researchers at the different universities, also universities of applied sciences, and I interviewed different people from industry to ask them what they're doing and what kind of topics they're working on. And what I saw is that they're working on three kind of themes. So in the first theme, I see that people are focusing on the individual and on the whole journey of a passenger. So also including the first mile and the last mile. So if you look, for example, on what the NS is doing, they're really looking at the whole journey and how can we make sure that people get to the train and also from the train to their final destination. So what you see is with all different modalities, how can we assure that all those modalities connect to each other in the right way? And how can we help people, how can we create a good passenger experience?
Yes, and what I see is that the discussion around mobility often tends to be about the benefits for society. The common good, maybe, like Madelaine presented in her previous study, or more the societal goals. So it's about less congestion, less pollution, greener cities, which are easier to reach. And those are, of course, all elements that we would like to see for ourselves. But for the individual traveler, this often means that a behavior change is needed. And indeed, like Madelaine said, trading their comfortable car in for something else. And that has proven to be very difficult to make a very long-term behavior change. And so it's critical to understand that the desires and the needs of the different travelers in order to be able to increase the adoption of services such as mobility as a service. Because if the individual users will not adopt it, then mass can never be a success, and the societal goals can also never be reached.
Yes.
So, yes.
Now, do you also see a change now through COVID? Because we are now in the COVID time period. So I can imagine that having a car is even more important to have for your own safety. You don't want to go outside. You don't want to be in contact with other people. So did you also incorporate that in your research?
That is something that we will study in the future. What we see now is that indeed COVID has an enormous impact on mobility. Not only how often we use it, but also the preference for the kind of modality. But yeah, that's not something that we know now. So it's ongoing.
It's ongoing. Yes.
Study.
Okay.
Yeah. What we did study, for example, this is a project done by Eva Taylor-Parkins. She studied the tariff system of the Dutch public transportation system. And she also developed or created 6 different personas for this. And that you see that all travelers are different and all travelers have different needs and different desires. So some travelers, they prioritize price, while others, they are more carefree. Some people, they are very, they want to know the system inside out, while others just want to travel efficiently from home to work and back every day. And as a traveler, you will also not identify each day with the same persona. It can be different for weekdays, for work days, or for the weekend. And one of these groups I want to highlight, that is the group of the analog traveler, this one, also the non-digital traveler. And the non-digital traveler, it is often associated with elderly. And some people also think that therefore the problem will solve itself somehow in the coming years. But however, there are much more factors that determines why a user is not using digital devices, and such as having a migration background, or being long-term unemployed, or being low literate. And we estimate that there are around 3 million people in the Netherlands that have low digital skills. And research by Max Sampimon from our lab has shown that there are 5 different groups, or he identified 5 different groups that can be distinguished. And those are the low literate travelers. So those are people who have difficulty with reading and writing. There's a lot of taboo for them. So they feel really ashamed that they have difficulty with reading and writing. And so they also try to hide it from other people. This group also includes the people with a migration background who don't understand the Dutch language yet. Then there are the opportunists. They use the smartphone for basic activities such as taking pictures, sending WhatsApp messages, calling, but they have very limited digital skills, and they are afraid of technology, and they are afraid to do something wrong. So they can perform basic tasks, but when it becomes more difficult, then then there are the low understanders. They have a very low understanding of the digital world. So they don't really know how to access information. They don't know about digital safety and privacy. And they are really, they feel anxious when they need to use a computer, and they feel overwhelmed, and they're really afraid to make mistakes. Then there are the conservatives. The conservatives, they prefer the old way, and they feel that the world has become extremely and increasingly complex. They also feel discriminated if there are no non-digital or physical alternatives for them to use. And they prefer human contact. And finally, the digital detoxers. These are people that are digitally able to use technology, but they deliberately choose not to use it. For example, because they feel it's bad for their health to be glued to their phone all the time, or they don't have a data subscription package for their mobile phone. And they feel that it's unacceptable for people that they are required to have a smartphone, to use a smartphone for basic services such as banking or transportation. And for all of these people, the increasing digitization of transportation services is creating a barrier for them to use it. And the result is that they have difficulty accessing work, going to family, going to sports, and there's really chance of transportation poverty with all those public transport services going digital and making it so that you need to reserve a trip before you go, because that's a really big step for those people. And I do think that it is unacceptable and that we should provide them with a physical alternative or a non-digital alternative, and so that we can keep our public transportation also publicly accessible for everyone.
So, Suzanne, these are the five personas. If you talk,
Yes.
to talk about digital devices, using digital devices, I can imagine now that we also have a sixth group, and that is the group that is not trusting digital devices, the complot denkers, the complot thinkers.
Yes.
Is it also? Do you also think that would be a group worth researching?
Yes, I think so. So these are the five personas that emerged from the research that Max did for his project. And indeed, like you said, the complot denkers, I have the feeling that in COVID times, it is also increasing, this group. And there has always been this group. Also, we've seen that with the OV chip card, that they don't want all of their activities to be registered, and they want to travel, be able to travel anonymously, and have no digital footprint at all. So yes, I agree.
Yeah, because you're doing, of course, a research on all different researchers that are at the moment present, so you cannot really adapt very quickly. But do you think that research adapts quickly enough to societal changes?
Yes, I do. I think the research is developing enough. Maybe we sometimes take too much time before we present it to the world, and that is something that we can perhaps improve for ourselves. That we not wait, but we are already trying to do that. Participating in these kinds of presentations, but we're also in our lab working together with different partners from mobility.
Okay, thank you. Other highlights?
Yeah, so what we see in the second cluster or second theme is that there's a whole context in which mobility occurs. So you see that we need to be more sustainable, circularity, digitizing, a pandemic, how do we deal with that? But also in the cities, that we don't want to have too much cars in the cities. How do we create a safe environment for ourselves? So an example is in the group of Carlo de Weijer at the Eindhoven University. So how can we design a city to create implicit safety? So then you really start combining other fields and create an infrastructure that is more safe and with specific lanes for bicycles and cyclers to assure the safety of people. And I think Suzanne also has an example on how she's doing that.
Yes, I have an example to share, which is a project done by Jelmer Kuroot. It's about the mobility hub of the future. And he was looking at the mobility hub. So the mobility hub is a physical central space in the neighborhood where shared mobility services are available, such as shared bikes or shared cars. And he looked at it and he observed that there are a lot of what seems to be unnecessary trips like the delivery vans that go through all the neighborhoods every day, people not being home. So there's a lot of extra additional trips. And so he thought, like, how could you combine those trips and providing you with more free time yourself and providing the neighborhood with more space and thereby less cars and improving the sustainability. So the primary goal of this mobility hub is to facilitate and promote multimodal travel. And well, it is, like I said, it's a physical space where the residents can rent, use shared mobility services. But next to that, it is also a central place where other service-oriented services are available, such as the neighborhood library or the water tap or the insect hotel. So there are a lot of different ones. And if the mobility hub wants to be a starting point of the neighborhood, then it should have a more meaningful interaction also with its users and connect the users to each other and to the neighborhood. This hub is therefore also a social connector in the neighborhood. Next to a central point where you can reserve and book the shared mobility, it also consists of several capsules, which are multifunctional and interactive. And these capsules are illuminated and they can be used by local residents to help each other with the collection and delivery of groceries or packages or lending and selling things to each other. So the capsules allow the residents to combine their trips and to limit these unnecessary trips.
Okay, wonderful. So starting points actually for the neighborhood, those kind of hubs. Let's see if there are any questions already for you both. Marjolein, are there already questions for Suzanne and Katinka?
I do have questions. I'm not sure we are set up to bring the people live yet. So perhaps if you have any questions here in the audience.
Okay. Are there already questions from the people here live in the FNR? There is one, and the microphone is coming.
Hi, Marieke Martens, TU Eindhoven. I was wondering, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes? How do you avoid, if you make these hubs, that you're not creating new problems where everybody is making more kilometers in order to get to a hub, and in the end, the hub itself becomes a new mobility problem?
So the problem of the mobility hub, so on the one hand, it's changing the behavior of the users and letting them see that there are other options than the private car. And on the other hand, of course, it's a big urban infrastructure challenge on where to strategically place those hubs that they are easily reachable by walking or by bike.
Yeah, but how do you, I mean, your question was also how do you avoid that those hubs are getting actually the new place of this behavior or the new place where all the cars are looking for a parking place, so you're creating actually a new problem?
So what Jelmer did in his project was that he said the interaction with the mobility hub should feel like a parent and child relationship. So it's about a mutual responsibility so that you take care of your own neighborhood and take care of your other neighbors. So that social element, I think it's really important to design for.
Okay,
and so on that, what I also heard from the people I interviewed is that we really should question whether a hub is the best solution at that point. Yeah. So when there is a place where we need to have a solution or where there is a certain problem, we should really think, is a hub the best solution or should we design something else? And I think designers are especially good in questioning whether this is the best solution and this is the way to solve it.
Okay, let's go back to the question.
Just to add, because I think a lot is about the research now is about behavioral change, which is very much based on social psychology as well. And I think the nice thing about design is that you can actually offer something that doesn't just forbid people to do something what they're doing right now, because people do what they do because it's for them it's good and comfortable. So if you want to have people change their behavior, it's nice if as a designer you can give them something that is even better or often offers new opportunities. And so then it makes it fun and nice and great to offer alternatives and not just make an app or something that prohibits people to do what they actually like to do. That was just my main.
Yes.
I
You believe
agree with you. Yes.
But just one question for because you're from the university.
Eindhoven.
Eindhoven. So you think that designers can also play a role in making that really a nice place instead of a place?
I think that should be our role, to make something that is great to use and nice to use and actually helps you do the right thing just because it's fun and nice and good, and not just because you're prohibited to do what you actually want to do.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Marjolein, already questions?
Yes, well, I have two people actually who want to join us. First, I have a question from Wieteke, and after that, I have a remark from Joost from the NS. So I'm quite curious about both.
Okay,
so I would like to bring Wieteke in first.
Yes, thank you very much. I personally attach a lot to design research and applications to real life, and I was curious, both of your opinions, whether you feel like big agents in mobility, such as NS, GVB, but also cities, municipalities, are sufficiently involving design researchers and can accurately find those parties in order to do problem solving and take care of the issues of the future.
I think this is a really nice bridge to the last theme we found in research. It's really about how do we do it with all the different partners. So all the solutions we are offering now, we need not just one company, but we need several organizations to make it work and make it happen. And also means that we don't have to only do it together with all sorts of companies, but also internally in the companies have to change the way we're working. And I think in Delft, there are several research projects in how to adopt it in the companies and how to change and how to make the different companies collaborate to make the change we want. And I think Suzanne also has an example on how she's doing that.
Yeah, so for us, indeed, it's also very important to connect all the different stakeholders from public parties and private parties. So in our lab, we are working together in a consortium with different stakeholders. So we're working with ministries, the government, with the public transport operators, also the technology providers, the traveler organizations, because we need to collaborate in order to be able to create a good experience for the traveler, but also on a larger scale, like for the neighborhood or for the transport system, mobility system.
So there is research also on that elaboration. Last question, Marjolein, because
I would like to give Joost the word.
Yeah.
Okay, we go to Joost for the last question.
Well, last.
Yeah, talking on behalf of NS. Was this thing about whether we involve enough design research. I think we can definitely do more. One of the big things, the last 3 years, we've done a lot of consumer insight-based design, concept design development, using external parties as well, collaborating with TU Delft, etc. I think the big problem at the moment is, yes, we are up for a big transformation. So it's not so much about designing happy flows and better experiences, but really motivating people to make the change. And getting it done we don't lack insights. Actually, we have very deep research in what passengers, travelers actually need, which we've done for the last 20 years. So I think we have a pretty good view and understanding how to improve passenger satisfaction, etc. The big dilemma at the moment is getting things done, in changing things, and topics like around the hubs. What's the best location of a hub? We've got the same question, of course, and whether to rely on digital. On one hand, we need better digital support for people traveling in a flexible way using shared transport. Durable mobility solutions. And on the other hand, we definitely agree with that we shouldn't over-digitize and still make it accessible to others. So there's a lot of these dilemmas. Hubs, we know for sure you need to make them flexible in order so you can you get a kind of adaptive system where you start with a hub. It might for the first years be an interesting location, and then it creates a bigger problem than it solves, and you need to move it or change it.
So Joost, can I just one interruption, because you say we have actually enough research. It's more about how do we get things done.
Yeah.
That's the challenge. So do you have a recommendation for the researchers? So what is their role, or how can they improve their work then?
So that's a bit why it's a dilemma. It's a big transformation we're in. One thing we know for sure is we're not doing it right from start. So it's great the researchers are present and accompany us doing pilots, and so we get into an iterative process. And there are no golden rules yet. So I think it's hard to come up with a recommendation, as I think research is in the game, is helping and supporting, for instance, all kinds of mobility pilots.
Yes, but the biggest challenge now. Yeah, so you say actually the biggest challenge is how to get things really done. So maybe we come up to this later on in Drive 2020. So thank you actually for your contribution, and for our researchers now, Katinka and Suzanne. I don't know if you have you told us everything, or is there still a small part that you want to share?
No, I've shared everything. I've got a last question for everyone. If you have any research or work you're doing that I should include in my further research, please contact me. Then I include it in the further work.
Okay, and how can they contact you? By
In the
emailing?
Chat. Yeah, I'll share my email address in the chat.
Okay, you share your email address in the chat. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us, also by Zoom. Katinka and Suzanne, yeah, give them a big hand. We can do this here in the studio. Because we have now a small break for you guys back home, but also for the people here in the Effenaar. And in the meantime, for the people back home, grab a cup of coffee or some water and fill in our poll, because we are wondering, what do you think is the biggest challenge in creating sustainable mobility? See you back in 10 minutes. Woo! ik dacht dat hij al was. Yes, welcome back to Drive 2020, the second part. Yes, I'm actually wondering also for the people here in the FNR, live in the FNR, but also the people back home. We had a poll, what they think is the biggest challenge, and also, of course, what they maybe think of the first half. Maybe you can ask them that as well in the chat. But the poll question, what do they think is the biggest challenge, Marjolein?
Yes. Well, there were 4 possible answers people could give, and first was on a technological level. That there was the biggest challenge, that it lies over there. Only 6%, so that's not a biggie.
Okay, so the technical level is not
that's
the
not
challenge.
a problem. That's not a problem. The social level, 1/3 of the people answered that. There the problem lies. Business model was for 14%, and the biggest, by far, almost 50%, was the inflexibility of the system as a whole.
Okay, the inflexibility of the system as a whole. Yes, and the people here live at the FNR, they're actually laughing. Why is it because of the inflexibility of the system that you're laughing? No, I think that's. Just one second, then we have the hang-all. We have the microphone. There, it's coming.
No, of course, the inflexibility of the system and the whole system. I was laughing. I thought, yeah, that's the easiest one to solve, but of course it's not.
It's not the easiest one to solve.
No, of course not.
No, but it's not surprising you that.
No, it's not surprising. So I think it's a good answer, but it's also, quite a challenge.
Yes, so inflexibility is actually the problem for a lot of.
But on the other hand, I think we should not stop by this idea or this notion. Because we have to do things.
We have to do, exactly.
And that I think it's by collaboration. So many things what came already in the first half. I think we have to work on that further. But we also have to kind of define, what are our goals? Where are we heading for? And then you can work on that. But otherwise, you get kind of stuck.
Yes, but you're also saying we have to define a goal, a common goal, which everybody can connect with, and then we have to collaborate.
Yeah, or several, of course. But it's here also in this topic of mobility. You can say the government says, okay, these are our missions. So how can we contribute? And there can be many things. And there's also, maybe a kind of everybody's waiting or thinking or see there's a problem and how can we solve it. When we have a goal, we say, okay, we choose that one.
Exactly.
And then we can work together on that goal.
Yes, so we need goals, we need a kind of leadership to reach that goal then, and then collaborate together with it.
Yeah.
Okay, Marjolein, any other thing in the chat maybe of the first half?
Well, not really yet, but I do have a remark from Antoine, who was on earlier, and Antoine was talking about I was thinking that we may speak more about the social inertia as an issue.
The social what?
Inertia.
And what does he mean? What does he mean?
Well, I'm asking him to elaborate.
Okay, so we come to that later on then.
We'll see, yes.
We'll
but
see.
It's an interesting notion, yes.
Okay, well, thank you. And for everyone back home, but also here, please chat with us, tell us your questions or your recommendations. And we move on to the third theme, actually, of Drive 2020 mobility. And that is what's happening now in the design embassies of the world. Because every day at Drive, we work together with one of the embassies of the world design embassies. And these embassies for the future are alliances of partners working on social challenges. Together with the designers, they work on solutions and develop new perspectives for the world of tomorrow. And today, we work together with the Embassy of Mobility, and we are going to find out what they are up to. And Rob Adams from Six Fingers, he is the representative of the design of the Embassy of Mobility. Yeah, Rob, welcome in Drive 2020.
Yeah.
You're going to tell us about the impact of COVID on mobility, and what are the lessons we have learned so far from around the world. Have you done that research by yourself?
No, not by myself, but with my team. So it's not only done by myself, because then it wouldn't be so good. So it's based on the knowledge and the research the team did.
Yes, so COVID, the effects on COVID on mobility. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Well, we are talking about the inflexibility of the system, mobility, cars and everything. But I think the biggest problem we have is not finding answers. The biggest problem is we don't ask the right questions. And it's not about inflexibility. I think it's about not preparing for plan B. If you look at the chaos theory, it says, well, the butterfly effect, that one small butterfly is somewhere in Brazil can make a big storm or tornado happening in the Midwest of the US. And we had that small butterfly in Wuhan in December, and it has a huge impact on this world. And it's not about, what we don't do is plan B and think about plan B, because we think we can plan everything, that we control everything, and it's not. We didn't plan for plan B, and we only improved plan A, and maybe that's one of the big problems we have. It's all about adaptation, but it's not adaptation of mobility. I think it's about adaptation of cities. How can they adapt too? It's not just a mobility question we have. It's a societal question, but I think it's a big theme in planning cities. And we brag along a lot about smart cities, and I think that's a stupid buzzword. Smart cities. It's all about data, and technology. The only thing technology does is make our life more efficient. And I don't hope when I become 70 or 80 and look back on my life that I think I had the most efficient life I could ever have experienced. No, it's not about efficiency. It's about quality of life. And that's what mobility has some influence on. So I'm going to tell you a bit. It's 50 minutes, a bit about what's happening all over the world, but especially what we learn from it. Which questions can we derive from it? Which questions become more and more important? I think that's the aim of research. It's not about giving answers. It's about finding the right questions. And this is the only part of the world where there's no COVID. So if you want to experience a non-COVID experience, go to Antarctica. The rest of the world has big COVID problems. We didn't dive into the mobility system in Antarctica. That's an easy one. So we looked around what's happening all over the world. And if you see, like in India, this has been a COVID experience. On the left, well, we took it for granted because, yeah, we need to consume more and more, and the economy is important. But this is what happened on the right side when COVID got there. And that's the same like in China. I think the right world is more beautiful than the left world. Well, we can have a discussion about it, but I don't think so many people disagree on this part. But we found, based on the research, three parameters. Three parameters derive from what's happening all over the world. And a lot of things are happening. The first one is that cities adapt. They don't know how, so it's one big experiment. Everybody says, this is the right thing, this is the right thing. Well, those are just answers. I think the future manifests itself not in answers, but in questions. But what did we learn from cities which adapt? First of all, one nice one is in Boston, the health streets. They thought about how can we make sure that people can get from A to B in the most safe way. And safe has to do with making sure that social distancing is possible, making sure you can travel with your kids or alone or whatever, which group you are. How can we make in a city health lanes? And if you know, then you know if I take this route, it's a safe route. That's what they are experimenting with. They have good results, so they are exploring more. How can we make lanes in Boston that are as healthy as possible? Another one, I like this one in Vienna. This is well, if you live in a city, you want to have some nice green experience, but you meet a lot of people. And what they did over here, you can get in at one place and you get out 20 minutes later on the other part of it, and you won't meet anyone because you're only allowed to walk one straight way. So if you go into it, if you wait for a few moments, you cannot, well, if people are in front of you, you have to wait. But if you go there on the right time, you just walk one way. You have a 20-minute experience of walking through the woods in the center of Vienna. I really like this one. This is thinking from another perspective about how can we add quality of life in the center of a city. And this has to do with COVID, of course, because they came up with it as a base on COVID. But this is what they this is what they are going to build in Vienna, and it's not just alone. No, it's like you walk in the woods in the center of Vienna. We heard a lot about the 15-minute city. I think this is from Paris' point of view. Those are the topics people in Paris think are important to have within 50 minutes reach. But it's not about mobility. It's about, is it possible by bicycle or by foot to have all the things I need within 50 minutes? Because then I don't need to move that much anymore. So it's not about adapting mobility because I need to go somewhere 45 minutes to the outside of Paris. No, it's about adapting the city so that everything we need is within a 15-minute reach. So that takes into account more quality of life, but it also has to do with what do you think is important for this 15-minute city? Some people, I ask people, some people say, well, I really need shops in the neighborhood within 50 minutes. Others say, no, it's nature. Others say it's... So it's about what is really important to have within this 15 minutes reach. And the second one, parameter we found, is that mobility changes. So it's not about the city that needs to adapt. No, it's the way we move needs to adapt. I really like this one. I think if you work on public transport, this is one thing you always would have wanted to say. You can travel, thank you everybody else. Go home, don't travel, save lives. So please don't use it, it's too crowded. Use some other one. But this is what you saw in London to make sure that people needed that. They needed to take another route. And this is, of course, in Paris. A lot of things is happening with cycling, and it's not that cycling, well, it's always about cars, that cars are bad and so on, but it's not true. Of course, cars have a big advantage too, so it's not about just saying, no, get the cars out of the way. No, it's about traveling in a safe way, and how can we go from A to B also within this 50-minute reach. Even the Rue de Rivoli, in Paris, very famous lane, a lot of cars used to be there. Well, no cars anymore. Well, of course, there are cars over there, but you're not allowed to drive there. And they are experimenting now, where do we need cars and where do we make sure that cars get out of the way, at least during these COVID times, and maybe it will be implemented later on for... This is in Bogota, the Ciclovia. It's also in a city which didn't have a lot of attention for cycling. Well, it's over there. It's in Bogota too. So a lot of cities are experimenting with this cycling. In Italy, you even get a big discount, or the governments pay a bit also when you take an e-bike, an electrical bike. But it's about experimenting. That's what's going on now. And nobody knows where it's leading to, but it's about experiments in a big way, because they build around 60 kilometers of road in Bogota. Or they didn't build it, they said around 60, 70 kilometers of roads in Bogota. You're not allowed to drive there anymore. We need to take the bike. This is from Streetlight Data. I visited them last year in San Francisco, and they see more and more people moving by bikes too. So this is all bike trips in San Francisco on a certain date. More and more cyclists in the center of the city. And of course, it's odd because a car has a big advantage. You sit in your own room without nobody or just with your family. So cars have a big advantage too. So on the other hand, we see also that more second-hand cars are being sold at the moment, also during COVID times, because people need to have a safe experience, and a car gives this safe experience. So I like this example of going Dutch. It's from Schiphol Group. They are experimenting with e-bikes too. And what they found out, that people don't care about whether or not they get wet or whatever weather it is. If they know for sure they are there within 42 minutes, and that 42 minutes is always accurate, that's when people are wanting to take an e-bike. So this experiment is getting bigger and bigger, but even this bike adapts to traffic lights. If the traffic light is red, this bike knows, and the speed, you need to decrease your speed and then increase again when it's green again. So it makes sure that you don't need to stop at any time on your trip. So they're experimenting a lot of it, good results. What will happen if we can have these experiments of Schiphol Group, for instance, in cities within the Netherlands or abroad? And this one is a very important, good one to see too. How do humans adapt? And if you look to mass kind of categories, we never thought about, last year it was about how can I get there on time, or how can I spend as less as possible? How can it be as cheap as possible, or as luxurious or whatever? But you see now that it's even possible within mass mobility services that you can take the choice of social distancing. And is this metro is arriving, and I'm not, the social distancing aspect is more problem solved, or having more problems with the first carrier that's going there. I will wait for the second or the third one, because then I know that one is, it's possible to have a more social distance in this metro. So you see more and more parameters are getting there because of the COVID, what's happened with our perspective and the questions we have when we want to go from A to B. Why isn't there the fun parameter? It's not there, but if I want to travel with my kids, they like to go by train or whatever. So more and more parameters will be added. So I think if you look, yeah, of course we've seen this happening, people need to adapt. But if you look back at these three parameters, cities can change, villages can change. Of course, mobility can change, but we as people, we are changing too, because we are changing the way we behave, we are changing in the way we make decisions. We are asking different kind of questions at the moment. And what if you would adapt these three parameters to the Netherlands? You have some graphs already that's saying, well, this 15-minute it's almost everything. Well, somewhere in northeast of Groningen, maybe not, and somewhere in Zeeland. But most of the things we need are within 15 minutes reach in the Netherlands. But if you look at that research that's being done about this 15-minute city within the Netherlands, well, we only take things that are needed for a supermarket, a big chain of shopping mall or whatever. But I think we need to think about mobility as it needs to add to quality of life and not to decrease quality of life. I think mobility has everything to do about how we plan cities, how we plan the things we need in a country, but we need to think from a mobility aspect as how can we make people as happy as possible, and what defines happiness of life, and that's where cities need to adapt, that's where mobility needs to adapt, and that's where we as a human being needs to adapt. So it's not a mobility question we have, it's a quality of life question we have, and I think we need to ask different kind of questions. Because if you would think about these three parameters, how can the Netherlands adapt to these three parameters? That's exactly the question. How can we, what means quality of life from that aspect, and how can mobility add to that instead of decrease? But we don't have a mobility question, we have a quality of life question, and that's the questions we need to ask. So let's keep asking the right questions instead of bragging about answers and shouting more and shouting more. I know the right question, I know the right, or I have the right answer. No, I have the right answer. That's polarization. I think we don't need it. We see it in society as a whole. It's a quality of life question. So ask questions about the quality of life, and let's stop asking questions about how to make plan A of the mobility system more efficient, more better and better and better. I think we need different kind of questions instead of telling each other which answer is the correct answer.
Well,
Thanks.
Rob, thank you very much. Please join me here for a few minutes.
Yeah.
Join me here, please, at the table for a few minutes, because I think there are also some questions. Marjolein, are there already questions from the people back home?
Well, we have a question from Pete, who's not able to join us live, but he's like, what's with the sudden focus on distance all of a sudden? Why do you focus on distance so much?
I focus on distance?
What?
Or we?
We, or in the COVID time period where we are living right now?
Well, I think because of the 1.5 meter, or I don't understand the question correctly, I guess.
Yeah, it's all. He says like, I thought being more global and being able to move about is the one thing that we'd strive for. So this 15-minute bubble, he's like, I don't want to be.
First of all, it's nice to live in a bubble, I think. But no, but this 15 minutes. In big cities, you need to travel from A to B for 35 or 45 minutes, like in London, in a subway, and the air is not good. It's not the quality of life to sit like a mole under the ground and come up somewhere. Of course, we need it because it's efficient, but this 15 minutes can add a lot to the quality of life. So, and I think it's an assumption that everyone needs to travel abroad and needs to go anywhere. That's not true. It's an assumption from a personal level, I guess.
Exactly, because is that 15 minutes bubble, is that your opinion, or comes that up from research that is really improving the quality of life if you travel time?
Well, they are experimenting with it, and people, some people like it, but it's an experiment. So it's not a given answer that we need to construct society with 15 minutes, with a 15-minute society.
Because for me, traveling is also a way of getting your mind set up, and sometimes it's nice if you have some more minutes or hours traveling.
Yeah, and
it's like yoga.
Yeah, maybe it is. On the other side, it's stupid that we plan cities with all. I never like when I sit in my home and look outside. I always see cars because somebody thought, well, this home needs to have a car in front of it. Everybody dislikes looking to cars and so on. It could have been green, and maybe people would have been. Would say, oh, I will walk for 7 minutes to my car or so. But 15 minutes, if you have the things you need most, like a supermarket and so on.
Those have to be in a scale of 15 minutes. I see a question from the audience. I don't know, two. Let's first start with the man sitting over here. He was the first one. Yeah, great, Sven. You get the microphone from Sven.
Hi, Marijn van der Pol, designer, former ambassador of the Dutch Design Week and advisor to the Ministry of Infrastructure and involved in this project. Talking about research, we talked to Ellie Harrison, who's an artist in Glasgow. She wrote a very cool book called The Glasgow Effect. Look that up. She lived in the city of Glasgow. She forced herself to live within the city limits for a full year. And it wasn't a picnic. She didn't like it much. She missed her family. But what she said was, before I was living in Glasgow, but I was never there. So indeed, improving a local quality of life does enforce or does make your life different if you choose. It doesn't mean that you cannot venture outside anymore, but at least you will be investing in your living environment, your community.
Okay, so that's your contribution towards the answer. Okay, thank you. And two other questions over there. Yes, Sven is coming to you.
Hello, my name is Marjolein van der Voort. I'm from the University of Twente. Another question, you describe like 3 different types of adaptations you see in society, and we know that actually the largest impact you get if you address the full socio-technical system at once. And I was wondering, like, because now you kind of present them as separate fields, what do you see if you talk about quality of life? What is the best adaptation we can make? Is it by the humans, is it by the mobility system, or should we change our infrastructure?
Okay, maybe a short answer.
Very short. I think it all comes from a human perspective. But the problem is with designing that we always say user-centered design or human-centered design. I think that's wrong. You should think about humanity-centered design because that has to do with the common goods too. But the focus should be, from a city perspective, on humanity-centered design, because if you look from a human-centered design point of view, well, you can build really stupid products and services based on the human need of one individual, because sometimes we need or want to do stupid things. So it's a humanity-centered design problem we have,
So
not
humanity,
the humans.
that's actually the core, and from that starting point, you create the rest.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, let's go to another question. Then we also go to someone who is actually waiting online for us. But first, the FNR.
Okay, in the FNR.
In the
it's really
FNR.
good. Yeah, so I'm Matthijs van Dijk, TU Delft and Reframing Studio. I was just wondering about kind of focusing on the quality of life. Wouldn't it be more appropriate to focus on a just society? Because we talked about, like, in the beginning, like, mobility is rooted in society, and now you see, like, mobility becomes also kind of a means to create a distance between the rich and the poor. And I don't hear anyone talking about it, and I'm just a bit worried that we kind of lose ourselves in the beauty of movement, which is there, I fully agree. But I think there should be another kind of issue on the table which we should start working on.
And what was your suggestion?
A just society.
A just society. So we have to focus on adjusting or a just society.
No, yeah, so that you feel that the difference between groups is as minimum as possible. So it's about rebalancing the mobility system, and not only locally, but also kind of like from a world perspective, because we all know what's going to happen in India and China. And
so it's more about creating an inclusive society.
Yeah, and where you feel that mobility is still meaningful, but again, so what was talked about, it is starting from a collective concern, and how can mobility kind of be kind of like redesigned that it's meaningful from the collective instead of quality of life of your own personal life.
Okay, good. Yes, Rob?
Well, I think I frame quality of life from a humanity-centered point of view. So what adds also to the future? So that's, but we also need to be very pragmatic. We all make solely decisions once in a while, and I think more often than once in a while. So we also need to be pragmatic. How can you change now, but also need to prepare for Plan B?
But do you recognize his concern about the world that's getting more polarized?
It is a big topic.
So how can design on mobility can contribute towards that problem?
I don't think that's just mobility problem.
Okay, so you don't think. Okay, but this is a discussion. But you say I don't think mobility is the only way to solve that problem.
No. The problem is if you took everything within its own mobility. We have mobility, health. You've got all these. There is something above it.
Yeah, but we have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's go to the.
Can I add one thing to it? Because
only adding then.
No,
yes.
there was a beautiful research done by the ING Bank. You can't believe that a bank came up with that research, but they did, and they proved.
Which bank?
The ING.
ING. Okay. Yeah.
And they proved that there's a correlation, a linear correlation between mobility and the national income of a country. So mobility is, from an evolutionary point of view, key to survival and key to our kind of explorative capabilities. So if you don't say that mobility is on top of one of the issues we have to address, and where it was said also by Dan that we have to follow the mission from the government. No, designers have to redefine the missions from the government, that we create a kind of inclusive society. So that's the whole point. So I think we're missing the point here completely this morning.
But I think you made your point that you're saying mobility is absolutely key to create an inclusive society.
I think we missed the point. So that's my opinion. But I think we should. So everyone talks from his own concern. So the guy from the NS is talking about the NS. We should talk about society.
Yes.
That's the only thing that matters.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your contribution. Let's move on to our last question, and that is from someone who is online with us. No? Okay, because I'm seeing someone online.
No, that's your next speaker.
Okay. So, well, Rob, then my last question for you is, because you talked about the COVID period, but that was probably the COVID, the lockdown, the first lockdown. Now there is another period of COVID, and I also agree a little bit with our first, the questionary one, that our society is getting more polarized, more tensed, more anxiety that's coming up. Do you expect that the outcomes of the next research period would be different?
I don't know. Let's keep asking questions. I don't know. I don't have the answer. I think most people don't have the answer. So it's just one assumption whether or not I would say yes or no. I don't know.
We will see. We will find out.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Rob Adams, thank you very much for exploring your story. Rob Adams, thank you. Yes. Yes, because we move on to our fourth theme, and that is about what will be happening in future research. I will talk about future research with Rob van der Heijden. He's already online with us. Welcome to Drive 2020, professor from Radboud University, and Erik Roscam, Abbing. You're actually on my table at the moment, a director of Livework, a service design bureau. Yes, well, let's start first of all with Professor Rob van der Heijden, because you started with a new research from a big call, a big funding called Transitie en Gedrag, Transition and Behavior, from the NWO, a national research organization. And in the next 4 years, you will work on the move, a transition towards sustainable mobility. Before you tell us what this research is about, maybe let's start with the recommendation of the person here in the FNR. Do you agree that mobility actually is the key in creating an inclusive society?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to have this discussion. Yes, I think the mobility is indeed a very important part of our discussion on the future of the urban cities. What I see today is that all the municipalities, and particularly the large cities, are working on developing a future plans for, let's say, the city of Amsterdam or Rotterdam, etc. And there they try to integrate a future view on mobility with discussions on health, with discussions on energy transition, with the urban living area, etc. So you see that they try to integrate all these aspects in terms of a new future perspective on how the city should develop. But mobility is a very important part of that. And that's also one of the reasons why we, in terms of the NWO program on transition and behavior, focused on the mobility, the future of the mobility system. And we developed a program for that, and it was granted earlier this year, and now we have started it. Yes.
Yes, because what will that research be about?
Yeah, it's called On the Move. It's a research program that has been developed by researchers from the Radboud University, together with researchers from the Faculty of Technology, Policy and Management of the Delft University. And so there's good connections in terms of research with social sciences and designers. I myself, I'm a building engineer from TU Eindhoven, very long time ago already, but I was working, or I graduated on urban planning. And what we try to do is we want to look into the future of the mobility system in a context of large uncertainty. Because that's something that we learned from previous research on mobility as a service in particular. We did quite a lot of research on mobility as a service, looking into aspects of collaboration of all the stakeholders involved, looking into what experts, international experts, thought about what the hiccups are for developing and implementing mobility as a service. And then we learned that there are quite some uncertainties involved in dealing with this typical new concept of mobility services.
So is that the focus then, how to deal with uncertainties? Is that the focus of the research?
Yeah, but what we also do is we perceive the mobility system as an ecosystem of different stakeholders. So we look in particular at citizens on the one hand, we look at providers, and we look at governmental organizations. And in this triangle, we try to understand the behavior and decision-making of each of these stakeholders and their interactions. And what we try to do is to investigate also what the possible impacts are on the future development of the mobility system.
Okay.
And based on that, we try to develop a kind of adaptive approach, planning and decision-making approach on how to deal with these uncertainties in the future.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you, Professor. Because Erik, and please stay with us, of course, for
Yes,
the
of course.
dialogue. Because Erik, you are a creative professional. You have. I don't know how big it is, but you got your service design bureau. A research like this, is that helpful for you to create really more progression?
Yes, it is, on a few conditions. So what I really like about Rob's research is this notion of this triangle, the triangle between academics and public bodies and private mobility providers. Designing the collaboration in that triangle is really key, and that's a huge challenge, and that needs all the help we can get from academia in this kind of research, but also from agencies like us, just trying things out, from corporates moving beyond their own system boundaries. So yes, very much so. What I miss a bit often in the discussion, and especially in also the way designers approach research, that they're very insight focused, they're very user focused, and they're very ideation focused. And that means that you can gather insights from users about what they would want, and then comes this sort of this big sketching phase of sort of imagining an ideal future. And those two are actually the easy part of the puzzle. So what I would really hope from this research is not only that, the insights and sort of the user perspective, but really how do we move public bodies like municipalities and corporates to think beyond their own system boundaries and to start thinking in what Matthijs very rightly coins, it is interest of society.
Yes.
That is the real challenge.
Okay, and is it also a recommendation towards a professor?
Well, yes, we discussed this before, and we talked about the designing for collaboration and designing for ecosystems that are genuinely new, that don't have a direct short-term monetary benefit. And how can you move this triangle towards that kind of collaboration? And that will require governments to step up. That will require maybe European money or NWO money to go to these kind of experimental new partnerships. Yeah.
Because Professor Rob, how can you actually, because it sounds a little bit that Erik already he knows already a little bit what the outcome can be of your research. So how can you make sure that your research is really going to give insights that are not given yet?
Well, I'm not sure whether Erik knows what the outcomes will be, because I myself don't know.
I'll tell you
that's
after.
a big. Okay, thank you very much. But we had a very interesting discussion last Friday on what in the similarities of the commonalities in the approach we like.
No, sorry to interrupt you, but what I actually mean is that isn't it very often that research shows us the usual suspects, that we in a way know that in that triangle it's about inflexibility, it's about interest of the different stakeholders, so that in a way we actually presume that we know what the outcome will be. But Erik, you told us that you need something else, you need something that goes beyond that knowledge.
Yeah, but I think Rob understands that very well.
So we are very much focusing on the process of how to collaborate between these different stakeholders, as I mentioned, and we do that together with what is it? I think 15 societal partners who are involved also in this project. So we seek the interaction with them, possibly in terms of experimenting, possibly in terms of real gaming, in terms of living lab type of approaches, where we develop, where we try to interact with these societal partners. And it's for instance, ProRail, it's the ministry, it's the municipalities, it's the province of Gelderland. Try to find a way on how we can envision what the future will be in the long term, and how we can get from there, from where we are now here, and how we can get there. So which steps do you have to make? What uncertainties do you deal with? How can you cope with that? That type of approaches is what we try to develop.
Yes. And what will be the scope of your research? How long will it take before we get any results?
Well, we started just last month with 4 PhDs and a postdoc, and we are in an initial phase or in the starting phase of the project, and it will take at least 4.5 years before we get, of course, the project will end. But in the meantime, what we try to do is to develop this interaction with these societal partners, and what we try to do is to make steps in between and share our knowledge with them, and also when others are interested, they can join. I think also in terms of developing training, in sharing knowledge, what we develop in thinking, in out of the box thinking, etc., etc. Because what we exactly know is that going on, let's say, a path-dependent approach is not good anymore. It doesn't work like that. We need new triggers and new ideas on how to develop this change in the system, which really makes it inclusive and sustainable.
Because could you say, Erik, that there is a kind of stagnation in creating results now?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think there's a certain naivety within the creative community around imagining possible solutions, getting all the insights of what people would want and creating nice personas, but having actually insufficient understanding of how to move systems. And I mean, we work for car manufacturers, and we work for public transport organizations, and we work for all kinds of mobility as a service providers, and inevitably they have to make that they understand the point on the horizon, and they want to move there too, and they will never deny that you can imagine great mobility hubs and systems that are all very nice. That's not the problem. The problem is, how can I move towards that desired state within my current business model, and how can I very slowly from within change my business model and start thinking differently about what it means to be viable as a business, and what feasibility means in terms of moving from technology to actually collaboration in multi-stakeholder partnerships. How can you make the first step in that? And how can you make the first step viable? Right? And that's I think the really big challenge, to divide it up in these little steps that also make sense and slowly.
And how can we do that together then?
Exactly.
Yes,
exactly.
with all the parties that really count.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, let's see if there are any questions, Erik and Professor Marjolein. Are there questions from our online audience?
No, it's actually a little bit quiet here. The people are coming back to Matthijs' point about just society, but no.
Yes. Okay.
That's about it.
Okay. Well, because is there a question from the people here? Oh, there are. Yes. Maybe Madelaine, because we haven't heard you yet in the public discussion. The microphone is coming to you.
We noticed in the design world that there is a tendency to grow more towards what you said, focusing on stakeholder management, on making sure that ideas are not only created but also implemented in certain ways. And I have a question, and I don't know the answer myself yet. I'm thinking about this a lot, but the question is, do we want to do those things as designers? So do we want to be the people who are doing stakeholder management, or do we say, okay, this is out of our hands, and let's get someone else to help us with this?
Yeah. So that's a great question, and I think beyond whether we want it or not, I personally do. I love it. It's great work. It's very rewarding work. But I also think we have a responsibility there to bring design and like the full impact of design to those kind of processes, to keep people on board, to empathize with a municipality employee who has a certain policy to execute, and to not only empathize with the end user, but also with that person, and to help them bring more meaning to their work in these very complex processes. I think that's where design is actually at its best. So I like to actually call out to the design community, take your responsibility there. It's maybe not as sexy. It doesn't give you nice pictures and images, but it's super rewarding work. Yeah, because
And
you
is it also incorporated in the education, in the studies?
well, so fortunately, we at Livework, we get students who like this work, but it's a bit of a special breed because it does require a lot of patience. It requires a lot of very slow, incremental change to happen and to manage, and it's not your average designer, maybe.
But do you think that it should change? That this is also one of the core skills of a good designer?
Yes, I would definitely say that. I do believe that this is not for everyone, huh? And we also need those really engaging visions. We need those ideas. We need that ability to visualize as well.
Yes, those
it's not
real artists. Those.
Well, it's not necessarily art. It's the ability to imagine possible futures and to engage people with possible futures. And then we need the people who can bring that into processes and into business models and into incremental change.
Okay, Erik, let's move on to two more questions, also according to the time. Yes.
My name is Robert Barrenhoren from Spark Design and Innovation. I want to add something on the role of a designer and how to do it. We also work with transportation companies to help the creative process and design thinking. And the role of a designer is to do the facilitation. But in those organizations, a lot of people working and they have a lot of ideas. And our role as a designer is those ideas bring to a higher level. Those people who are working there, they're not designers and they're not from the academic outcome, but they work in the real field. And what we do as a designer, we bring it to a higher level and help them prototyping it, learn from it. So come to a lot of iterations, so at the end we can apply it. So that is one very important role of a designer. Yeah. Help people with ideas, bring them to a higher level.
Okay, so that is your role interpretation.
One of them.
One of them.
But
yes.
the ideas, we're talking about the ideas, not only designers have those ideas, but especially the people working in the field have many ideas. And we have to help them to come to the next level.
Okay, well, thank you. Let's move on to our last question.
I think there was also a question there.
No, sorry. The microphone is now there, and then then we move on to you if you really have an urgent question.
It's a question for the professor. Why do you focus on the uncertainties and not the certainties? Because it feels like, what are you aiming for if you aim at the opposite direction you want to go to?
I think when you focus on the certainties, you run the risk of a very large past dependency in your thinking.
Yeah, but you can avoid that by kind of having a kind of critical mind yourself. So it would be really strange if a professional would kind of like do that, make that mistake, because that's exactly the role of the professional not to do that.
Yeah, what I learned from all kinds of processes, we're also working on, for instance, circular economy and circular building. And what we see is that the partners in such processes are very much dealing with very deep uncertainties, and that's what we try to understand. Is everybody aware of the existence of different types of uncertainties? Are they able to recognize that and to deal with it, and then come up with a kind of no regret steps you can make in order to change the system? So that's the way we try to approach that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Erik, do you also agree that focusing on uncertainty is actually how do you call that, a good way instead of the certainties?
Well, I think that's also, I hope that's what Matthijs means, that you can create certainties within a very uncertain space, and you cannot move blindly in uncertainty. So this is not about focusing on the uncertainty, it's finding little pockets of certainty that you can actually deal with and start doing something within this uncertain field. And that's what design does. Design creates these pockets of future, these pockets of certainty within this very broad, uncertain field.
Yes.
I think that's probably what we mean when we're saying we're focusing on the uncertainty. If you only focus on what is known and certain, it's hard to shift paradigms, obviously, but This is not about creating some misty landscape and hoping that everyone will move along. That's not how it works.
No, I see the
No,
professor.
Just give me, can I, just an
Sure.
example. When we developed this research program and we submitted it to NWO, and it was granted in January, February this year, we got COVID-19 just shortly behind that and in time. So what we see is that we have an enormous amount of uncertainty on what it impacts, how it impacts the mobility system, and we didn't know when we prepared the proposal. So it's just an example of how uncertainty can influence us, and we see that also in relation to other types of transitions in the urban system.
Okay, well, my last question, because time flies actually, is for you, Erik, because you are, I don't know if I can say an engaged designer, but you care for the world, and also for, you want to create sustainable mobility. So what kind of assignment do we have to give you right now that you drop everything out of your hands and that you would say, well, this is my dream assignment, please call me if I can solve this problem? What would it be?
Well, actually, that's an assignment we are working on, and it's not landed yet, but we're working on it. It's a very large car manufacturer who is looking at shifting internally from the mindset of we are a product manufacturer and we do transactions with I sell you a product, you give me money, to actually being a consultant to municipalities and working with neighborhoods to care for their mobility and to co-create mobility with the citizens. And they are looking to experiment with city councils to set up local city labs that are run by the neighborhood, where they facilitate and they partner with public transport. And that's interesting from sort of a value proposition perspective, but especially from a large German car manufacturer who's making that mental switch.
Yes.
That makes me go yay.
Very happy, yes. And they also, they show their social responsibility with the project as well.
Yeah, but this is not charity. Yeah? They do this because they know that is the business model of the future. They have to move into this space and they have to learn about it and to understand it. So they're not in it to do good. Huh? They're
exactly.
in it because this is what mobility in the future will look
yes,
like.
They have interest in it, and that's the only way that it will work. If we all have interest in that goal, reaching that goal. Professor, thank you very much, Professor van der Heijden, for joining us with Zoom, and also Erik, Roscam, Abbing, for joining us here live in the Evenaar. Give them a hand, yes. Yes, because we are actually moving to the end, Marjolein, is there any comment that we really have to take care of now?
Is there any, sorry?
Comments in the chat?
No, sorry.
No. Well, that's fine. I mean, then the people online hopefully they are happy and that they really enjoyed watching Drive 2020, our first broadcasting, because we will be tomorrow as well. So please join us for tomorrow again. Then we will talk about circular and bio-based building. We have an inspiring architect, we have research on materials, of course we have the embassy of circular and bio-based building, and we also will talk about future knowledge. So join us tomorrow, 11 o'clock, Drive 2020, circular and bio-based building. And thank you for watching with us right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.